Settle yourself down, folks. It's time. I can only hear myself.
Check one.
Lorenzo. All right, we're going to start. So take a seat. Oh, good, that's working now. Ben Campbell. Sorry, I just wanted to do that one time. Thanks. So we're sharing the slot today with STIR, so we have an hour for our meeting. Let's get into the bits. Oh, look at that. It's terrible. Yeah, you need to do the thing. Not space. Really? Okay. Because this is the start of the week, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this one. The Note Well outlines your obligations as you participate in this meeting. That means, at a high level, we want professional conduct here. Be civil. Be kind to your fellow human being. And also let us know if you have intellectual property rights or are aware of any that relate to the things that you're talking about. I'm assuming everyone is familiar with this, but it's worth spending a moment to think about that.
Anyone's not playing with blue sheets?
This is the why we are here slide.
Yeah, by the time I sit down, it's already gone.
Hang on to it and pass it around.
I'm going to tweet more if that's how we start working groups. That's awesome.
This is not why we started the working group, but thank you, Mark, for reminding us why. So I've got probably one bash related to this one. Tommy's going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the API. We're going to do that after the wireless broadband folks. But first we'll start off with a bit of status. Brian Shields has a presentation there about the perspective of the WBA group. And then we're going to talk about some of the remaining issues that we have on the open drafts that we have. I think, Eric, you have some slides on 7710 as well.
There's one after this, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'll let you talk to that.
This is our current status. For 7710 BIS, there was a call on the mailing list. It was adopted and uploaded as IETF. It was we have some improved content negotiation text thanks to Mark. It was moved to the Capport Portal Working Group GitHub repository. And I wanted to propose a question for the group, and that was whether or not we should request that the IETF 106 network run an experiment where we hand out a 7710 BIS URL that takes you to a static web page, basically an API that just has this JSON in it. It just says captive, false, and the venue info URL takes you to the meeting page. And from the meeting page, you can get to the agenda, and you can get to the floor guide, and you can get to the how to get to the emergency hospital stuff and all that good things. So if the working group thinks this is a good idea, I can take care of sending the request to the NOC and Alyssa and so on and see how this flies. I think it's all static content. There's no redirections with ampersand, Mac equals foo, IP equals bar kind of stuff. It's just simple as can be.
Oh, yeah. We're doing that again, right?
I'm assuming that information wouldn't be collecting any actual data about the people, and so we should probably make that clear.
Yeah, so
You
as
know
part
how
of
that
the
works now.
DNS over TLS experiment, I think we had to say what data would be collected and what would not be. I was imagining we would just be interested in the diversity of user agents and the number of times the API had been fetched. I expect for 106, maybe it won't be that many, but maybe for 107, things will be different by then. Do any of the implementers, any of the operating system implementers in the room think that something could possibly query this by Singapore? Even an experimental build?
Tommy Pauly, Apple. Yeah, I think in an experimental build, especially like if we have like hackathon projects to like test that explicitly, I think that'd be good. We can definitely do something on iOS or macOS to do that. So that'd be great. And so to that end, we should capture the information, how many times we see people connecting to the URL and how many times we see them trying to use the correct API format and the media type requests, as opposed to something that's like doing a legacy thing that we don't expect.
I think the other should be a thread on the mailing list about what data we're going to explicitly say to collect and what explicitly not to collect and so on.
I think, yeah, definitely. It would, and one thing that we'll get out of this is someone's going to have to write down how a network operator might actually do something, so in detail, in a way that's easy for them to consume, which may not be the case for the RFC itself at the moment. So, for example, do we need an SSL cert? You know, who's going to issue that? You know, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Yeah, you didn't say where this was hosted, but we can work that out. Yes, we will need a cert.
And who's going to run the web server? Is it the IETF meeting? Is it somewhere else?
Yeah, I propose we do that on a local one. It's much easier to do that.
Let's not worry about that. We'll sort it out.
Yeah, we have it. Okay, that was that.
Anything else?
I think that was that, unless there's other comments. That's all I had on the. Come on. Here. No. Is Brian ready? Brian there? I see you. I see you. Are we ready to attempt this?
So Brian, if you can join the queue, I think, maybe. I don't know how this works, but we have a big red button that we can let you in.
Can Meet Echo participants hear us?
Yes. He's asking to talk there.
So he needs to get in line.
Okay, given the difficulties we're having here, I think we'll skip to the next one and we'll come back to this one. Once, I think, a couple of minutes for Tommy's presentation, and then we'll see how things work out.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Tommy Pauly, and I'm one of the co-editors of the Captive Portal API document. We have recently posted a revision of it, not hugely changed, but I did want to give an overview of what we have done and get feedback from the group on that. All right. So the relevant changes to talk about in 03 are we did a much more rigorous definition of the registry for the keys that we would have in the Captive Portal API and how we would allow people to extend that. So that's now an IANA registry that we're creating there. So this allows us to have new JSON keys and values to extend this. We definitely do expect this to be extended. The set we have right now is very minimal. For example, it does not allow things to do kind of headless captive portal association if you don't have a UI, and that's something that people would want to do in the future. This would allow that. We also changed one of the names of the keys from a vendor info URL to a venue info URL. This relates to what was being proposed as the experiment. These URLs of how you get more information about your venue, like the IETF meeting, is really venue specific, not like a vendor. We also did make the user portal URL, which is the UI that you would do to actually authenticate, an optional key instead of mandatory, to be a little bit more future proof, because we could have things in the future that do not require that. And then we did fill out the security consideration section, which was just a to-do. It mainly summarizes the security requirements that we list earlier about how you need to use HTTPS to talk to the portal, how you need to do certificate validation, etc. There was one open issue that's remaining on the GitHub, and it was originally about just we should have a registry, so we did that part of it. But there was still a comment about should we, within this registry, have a specific guidance for how we have either sub-dictionaries or labels on keys that are organization specific, such as if the WBA wanted a set of keys for things, should there be an official prefix mechanism that they reserve that way or not? I don't have a strong opinion on this, but if people do, please let us know. I think that's it.
There is an official X dash that's not recommended.
X dash is not recommended. We do not do X dash. That's Lorenzo.
Not necessarily related immediately to this talk, but one thing that we've heard over and over and over and over from captive portal operators is that they want to be able to continue to track the same user through the captive portal login page and through subsequent activities.
Mhm.
And the Android default behavior is to take away the captive portal login page when the login is complete.
Mhm.
And one thing that I thought of that we could use the API for, though not in 7710, would be if there were a way to include some sort of session ID in the venue URL. So one of our plans would be to, we have a notification in Android Q that says you're connected to the captive portal. Right now it says nothing. But if that had a click here for venue information and it had a session ID, then maybe we could put the user back into their same flow.
Yes.
They can like pay for more stuff that they wanted to be charged for, whatever.
Correct.
The only question there is this can't be really, the 7710 URL definitely can't be updated.
Because the 7710 URL in the BIS version points to the API, right? And
Maybe we just need an API key that says here's your
yes.
IP.
So there are two URLs that are specified already in the JSON for the API. One is the portal URL, which is the thing you go to initially, but you could also essentially go back if you need to re-up your plan. And then there's an extra one for like, here's the information about your flight, if you need that. So imagine UI could link to both deeply all the time.
Is it possible for the network to generate a session ID early enough in the flow that session ID is not going to change? Or do we need to like do another poll of the URL after we log in, as it were? Do you see what I mean, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
We can definitely do another poll just before we tear down the captive portal view. But if the network can basically generate that one-time URL, then maybe that's we don't want the MAC address in there, presumably.
No, yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe this is if it can be done with another key. I guess maybe it doesn't belong here. I don't know.
Looks like Brian wants to comment on this. I assume.
All right, I was just getting ready for the presentation.
Okay.
But I have a part of my presentation that goes over that exactly.
Okay, great. And if there are any changes we would want to make to the API to do that, that'd be good. I mean, the JSON here can be dynamically generated, so it could include a session ID in the URL. We could also have new keys that get registered to specifically define a session ID that is to be used on future connections.
Right, the 7710 BIS URL could be per client in DHCP messages, but it can't be per client in an RA.
Correct. So I think it'd be better to do that through the API. So essentially the next steps here are we really do want to do interop with portal vendors. I think the proposal to do a interop of like the dummy case of a non-captive network is really good, and we should do that here at the IETF next time. But if we have people who are implementing captive portals, please reach out to us about doing an interop of this. I think that's kind of the thing we need to do. And then once we have validated that, I think we should just kind of get these things out the door. That's it.
So yes, maybe after Brian's presentation, we can talk about what the next steps are. So Brian,
Hi.
disappeared briefly there. You have the floor.
Great, thanks so much. All right, well, it's a real pleasure to speak to IETF at 105. It's as a nerd and an internet denizen, it's kind of a big deal for me. So thanks a lot. My name is Brian Shields. I work at Boingo Wireless here in Los Angeles, California. You might be familiar with our airport Wi-Fi, but we're also big in cellular and other technologies and convention centers and military bases and a lot more. And I've been working in Boingo since 2007 and also with the Capport portal since then. And as you probably are well aware, a lot has changed since that year when the iPhone first came out. Boingo is a member of the Wireless Broadband Alliance, where I'm representing today. And I'll be talking about the WBA and what we do in our projects, especially the Capport Portal project, and how it would be mutually beneficial for IETF, especially hearing what you're all talking about right now. This is music to my ears. So if you can hang on this slide, I'll go over the WBA. Overall, it's an alliance of over 100 members. It's a community of network providers, manufacturers, and technology providers. It was established in 2003 with the charter of developing seamless and interoperable services across wireless technologies. WBA was one of the forces behind the widespread adoption of 802.11u, Hotspot 2.0, aka Passpoint. Next slide, please. This is a quick overview of the work groups and projects of the WBA. The groups are there are groups focused on wireless deployments and convergence, 5G, IoT technologies. There's roaming work groups for sharing customer access across partner networks. And finally, there's a testing and interoperability group, and that's where the Capport Portal project is based. And I know there's many of the IETF membership that are already members of the WBA, so I invite them to participate in the Capport Portal group as well. But we're also very happy to work on the IETF side too. For more information on membership, you can contact the email at the bottom, tmo@wballiance.com. Next slide. So the charter for the work group, a little bit more about the Capport Portal standards. We've been active for over a year, since January of 2017, when we first formed. We've been working on a white paper that will document how current operating systems behave by client, OS, and version. We're actually externalizing a crowdsourced GitHub page that will describe all of the behaviors across versions and operating systems, and releasing that to have the public, anybody contribute. And what we'd like to do is document the behavior as well as the current pre-auth connectivity and onboarding process So that's going to be part of the white paper as well. And then also out of that audit, we've been auditing that behavior. We also want to recommend improvements for the clients and onboarding for better quality experience. An example of one of the issues is on the next slide. So this is a diagram, flow diagram that shows the Capport portal flow kind of overlaid by operating system. And as you can see, it's obviously very fragmented. There's a lot of use cases that are different across this. As mentioned earlier for the post-off issue where the Capport portal closes automatically on authentication on Android as opposed to with iOS and Mac OS that stays open for post-off attribution or more further instruction for the end user. Next slide, I'm going to show you some of the issues that were raised in our work. This is a shortened list to keep this presentation brief. And we're finalizing this white paper that includes the complete list. And right now we're in the final editing phase. Once we complete the white paper, we'll share it with the world. Next slide, please. So 3 of the main pressing issues. First one is the client connectivity check. A lot of different operating systems use different URIs, their reference. This creates a management issue on the operator side to whitelist the URIs, as well as any that are calling HTTPS. You're all well aware that this creates cert authority mismatches when the CA is checked. And just overall demand in the middle behavior creates a lot of technical issues that we find ourselves having to work around. Also, the fragmented use cases, as I mentioned before, difference between Apple and Android and Windows interpretations, the post-op behavior, as I mentioned. And then just overall limited features available. There's no way to trigger the Capport portal in a dev mode. No debugging tools. You can't traverse the DOM. You can't do inspection on the code. There's limited W3C standards. And there's no support for client-side state management. So we can't recognize an end user the first time, ask them to complete filling out a form, for example, and then the second time recognize them very easily, at least through the client side, through standard cookies, and say, hey, welcome back. We're going to allow you to skip through the initial flow. The next slide. So how can we collaborate? So the WBA's constituency is one of our great strengths. We're composed of network hardware manufacturers, network providers, technology providers that can help with the focus of this issue and test it on scale. And what would we work on together? So next slide. This is a short list. We'd like to work on possibly an RFC for near-term usability standards that falls within the scope of IETF. Also, we'd like to propose short-term fixes for manufacturers to add into their dev cycles. And we're really interested in 7710 BIS and its potential for, I think, solving a lot of problems that we'll address in the white paper. And I think could also set the stage for a lot of new innovation and unlock a lot of new functionality with the Capport portal that could add to a lot of better user experience. And then also we want to make sure the enterprise is included. Hotspot 2.0 and 802.11u use cases have limited support. This is starting to come through with, I believe, Android Q has added support for this, but the ability to engage with the end user and to put them on a Passpoint network in the enterprise would simplify a lot of onboarding for enterprise. And then any other activity for IETF regarding Capport portal that we can help with, we're in. This is what we do every day, and we want to improve the experience for our end users and streamline access to the network to get them online as fast as possible without a lot of friction. So that pretty much covers everything. So I told you about the WBA and its charter, the Captive Portal Work Group, highlights of our activity and the issues we'd like to work on, and how and why we make a great partner to solve a lot of the issues with our customers. So if anybody's interested in joining WBA or the work we're doing, contact PMO at www.alliance.com. I think that's it.
Right. Does anyone have any questions for Brian? Have a bit of discussion about this, and maybe we can.
Lorenzo Colletti, Google. I would, speaking of which, actually, we're writing code for 7710 as we speak. I think it was, last week, somebody was starting to write code, and we sent a kernel patch upstream for the RA option as well. But I think a couple of things really. One of them is the classification of legacy behavior. I would not maybe spend too much on that because it will be subject to change, and I think it's sort of not really good to characterize. Even the behavior amongst Android devices is radically different. Different OEMs have different behaviors and so on. I would instead try to focus on how can we make this better going forward using some proper APIs. I think 7710 is part of it. One thing I don't see here, Hotspot 2.0 is, I think, in a much better shape. But one thing I don't see here is the Capport Portal API, and I think that is something that it would be good if, to be honest, from an Android perspective, we want to implement that, but we don't really have existence proof of a network operator that can build it. And so until we do, we're sort of not sure what priority we need to assign to it. So I think if someone is willing to sort of bring up some tests, write some code and bring up some test environments, we're happy to sort of collaborate on that. So I think the API would be really good to work on together.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you.
Dan Harkins, since this is Captive Portal for Wi-Fi, are you recommending or requiring RC8110 to protect the Wi-Fi connection?
So you're gonna, I'm not familiar with that RC. Sorry.
So,
maybe
opportunistic wireless encryption that
authenticate.
There's no authentication, but it's encryption of the wireless medium between the station and the AP, so that you don't basically connect in the open, set up this nice TLS connection with the Captive Portal, and then when you're done, you throw away all that nice cryptographic state and go back to an open connection that can be hacked or passively observed.
So Dan, this is probably something you can take up with Brian. I can.
Yeah, but learn more. So that sounds great. Sorry about that.
It's a good question, but I think we'll find that out some other way.
Tommy Pauly, Apple. So, thank you for sharing this. It's great to hear that you are interested in helping test this out, and particularly when we're talking about 7710 BIS plus the API. As we were talking about for next IETF, it would be good to do a experiment here on this network, but it would also be great at the same time if we could do some testing, perhaps in the hackathon, perhaps other than that, kind of on-site with a Captive Portal network. Would it be possible to have your side, the vendor, come and bring a box that has this implemented so we could test this out at the hackathon?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done the same thing with Passport Network. So we've set that up. Sorry, I'm hearing feedback. Please do that. But yes.
Okay, that'd be great.
Brian, any of your either you or your collaborators, have you had a chance to read any of the API and architecture and 77 just documents and details? Do you have any feedback for the list?
Only that there was some confusion for me about the redirect URI that is in one of the fields. Or actually, in the DHCP option, I assume that that's going to provide a reference to the API itself rather than give you the ability to just point to a Capport portal page.
That is what 7710 BIS clarifies, is that the
Okay.
option URL is to the API, and inside the API are further URLs.
Yeah, I think the only thing that we would want to look at is just to try and align some of the requirements that we've established in our white paper to see if we can get additions to the endpoint if there's a mismatch. So we can talk about that, I guess, once we release our white paper, we can see how that could align.
Just relate from the Java, I think, Ilya, somebody else from Maxima, they are also willing to implement 7710 for experimentation. So just relate from the mic.
Thank you. Any other questions for Brian? Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Is there a chance we'll see you in Singapore?
There is a chance. I'm gonna go talk to my boss right after this.
Great.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I think the next item on our agenda is the open issues that we have on the architecture document. I just want to go through those briefly. We talked about most of these last time we met, but I think it's a good opportunity for us to hopefully close some of them, or at least you don't need to worry about being logged in. Just go to the architecture doc, scroll down. Do we have Suresh in the room?
He has office hours.
Oh, wonderful.
I talked to him about it yesterday.
So our editor here is occupied. So let's just go through these briefly. Hopefully I can understand what the problems were. I opened most of these issues myself, so that's going to make it easier. So one of the things that came up is that, yeah, I think we might need control plus probably.
So this way.
Hey! So super fast. So some networks do, during the process of, during the stage in which someone is captive, still provide access to DNS resolvers, even those that are outside the network. That won't necessarily be true for something like DOE or some of the other DNS variants. Sometimes these networks allow UDP on 53, but not TCP on 53, and all sorts of other interesting combinations of the same sort of problem. The question here is what text we provide in the document that around this particular class of problems. And so the problem here is making sure that the clients have the ability to request the Capport portal API document, and that requires name resolution. And so I think the suggestion was to disable any of the external manually configured resolvers, no matter how you were intending to interact with those resolvers. Michael.
DNSSEC, it breaks every time I go to Capport portal and I can't reach even anything.
Well, this is true of the current system, but this is not in this one necessarily.
Right, and so I think that we need to have, and the nice thing about DNSSEC is that I don't mind if you intercept my packets and answer them, because I can validate them myself. Right.
Let's keep that conversation for tomorrow, if we can.
Well, you get to log in. If I use your DNS server, you get to log my query anyway. But the point is that I have to reconfigure everything to use your DNS server, and there. So I would like to have some statement that DNSSEC, I should be able, if you put DNSSEC on your portal name, I should be able to validate it. And that means I need to access all of the resolvers above your name. All the authoritative resolvers above your name, not just your recursive resolver to get the name of your captive API.
Interesting. Okay.
So again, it's okay if you proxy my stuff as long as you return the data correctly signed, right? Michael Richardson is Mike.
But it's also possible that DNS over TLS and DNS over HTTPS may just be blocked by the portal policy at some point. So I think there's no option but to use the network's DNS servers during portal validation. I'm not sure that we can say anything.
The issue is germane. I mean, I think, you know, if let's say if the captive portal operator forgets to block, you know, 443 to the DNS server, then it sort of all falls over. From an implementation perspective, to be honest, the simplest thing here is to say, look, just use clear text DNS to the network's DNS service. You know, personally, that seems the simplest option. I think if we require the name to be globally reachable and resolvable by global DNS servers, that may make it more complicated to deploy. So, you know, I was on a plane, you know, yesterday, and of course the name isn't globally reachable, so it breaks the standard captive portal flow, but it doesn't break the captive portal app because the captive portal app knows not to do this. One thing I would oppose is do not disable, never say disable encrypted DNS, only say disable encrypted DNS for this query.
Right, right, and that's going to be important. It's only for these queries that you make to the API, and potentially also to the captive portal pages as well. This is going to make it really interesting for those people who are implementing the browser parts of this.
It's broken today, right?
Yeah.
If you do DOT on a captive portal, you
Yeah,
know,
boom, boom,
it
yeah.
doesn't work.
Yeah, a lot of things break in these modes. So having some recommendation here, acknowledging the complexities of implementation might be wise.
Tommy. So yeah, very much agree with Lorenzo's comments. And I think we could probably go as far as saying that when you are doing the resolution of the API and the connection to the API, you kind of must use the local infrastructure for that. And one way to think of this, if we're talking about like kind of provisioning domains and consistent sets of my DNS plus my routing and other things, when I am doing something like DNS over TLS and have an external server that I've configured, that's effectively a custom PVD that's not purely local. And so we kind of just want to say that if you are doing any connection to the captive API or this stuff, it needs to be within a purely local provisioning domain. Just use the local information. Don't try to access anything else. And that can and should be separate from what other applications are doing. And that you should allow applications to essentially choose into the local config just for this purpose.
Colin Jenks, it just sounded like some of the solutions that have been proposed to this, violate the policy of, now I can run a VPN hidden over the DNS, and obviously we can't have a solution that does that, or no one will ever really use it for lots of the cases. So,
yeah, I think this is recognizing that if you use the local network infrastructure for this, then there's much less chance of those sorts of things happening.
that seems
Which
very
is-
consistent with that, yes.
Yeah, consistent. All right, let's go to the next one. I'll make a note in the issue. Yeah, so I think this is again just text in the document, but there is the possibility that a captive portal might lie about certain things in order to get people to go to web pages. You have an open network, but you advertise a captive portal and say that someone's captive when they're not. I don't care about this particular scenario, and I've heard from people in the past that this scenario, it doesn't bother them particularly. I'd like to confirm that though. And and then ask what we would write down in this case.
What would an operating system implementer do? Maintain your current connectivity checks
In all cases.
in all cases?
So I don't see us ever deleting those. Well, never say never. So never.
Tommy, can you suggest some text for us, or at least an approach we might take here?
Right, well, I mean, one thing I was going to propose as an approach is potentially not really committing to what the implementation needs to do with the nuisance, just essentially say this can happen, that they can lie, and implementations can decide what to do about it. They should have some approach, either by, doing the probes that are validating. We can have any number of heuristics, any number of ways to kind of like back off or detect the people who lie, or flag them, or allow the user to say, oh, this network seems to be acting strangely. I don't think that's for this document to really design the solution to.
And this is consistent with decisions we've made in the past. People do whitelist the captive portal checks for various operating systems, and we explicitly decided not to address that. So that I think this falls under that as well.
So do we need a text change here?
I think it might be worth acknowledging the problem,
'Cause there is a
even if we
section-
don't do anything about it.
There is a section for nuisance captive portals, right?
Calling it nuisance might become controversial.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't talk about nuisance.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's correct as it is.
My question, so if I have a captive portal and I whitelist everyone's MAC address that I like so that they don't get any restrictions, everyone in my company, for instance, and I still put this thing in there, is that still a nuisance? I just want to say to the people, this network finally brought to you by the household of.
Is the API going to say captive:"true" or captive:"false"?
Yeah. So when you
Yes.
get to the API, I do that, but in the process of doing that, I have something that I can use. So you think
This
that's
is the text that's being talked about.
Right.
I think it's very-
you think that it's enough? Okay, I just want to be clear that I understood the problem here and why people calling it a nuisance, that's
I mean,
all.
You don't, because it's only specific to the signaling.
Okay, I understand.
Just wanted to clarify, this section starts with if a signaling protocol is implemented. And the summary of the section is, if it's implemented, then somebody can spoof the signal. Yep, that's right. And so there's a risk.
I don't think we have any plans at the moment to specify what a signaling protocol is, so maybe this is less of a problem.
So, Michael, again, so I think that maybe my confusion is that, is there advice that client operating systems should, because they've seen the signaling protocol, are going to do things which they didn't need to do, and someone says captive true, but they're not really captive? Is that that's what I understand?
That's essentially what the text is saying.
Yeah, and so, and the advice is to go ahead anyway. The network's working, so go ahead anyway. Don't bother the user.
The signaling protocol is this out of band thing.
Yeah.
So like it sends you asynchronous signals. Yeah. So maybe do we need to put the text on screen? Because then I think we'll probably be able to resolve this, what you told me.
Yeah. And it is a copy. It's the best.
Search for risk of nuisance.
Right at the very bottom on the right hand side. And zoom.
Scroll up a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, Jean-Charles Boulou. I'm trying to think of what someone saying captive false and still advertise a URL could mean by that, and how client could want to react to that. If we're going to, say, put up a notification to respond to whose advertised URLs, then it might sometimes be perceived as a nuisance. And if we don't do that, then I can easily see operators putting that flag to truth, saying yes, captive portal yes, it's captive, just so that they get the notification.
So this is a risk we've acknowledged, I think, in the past. It is always possible that the network could be captive in some way that you're not able to detect as well. So one of the problems here is that if we try, and we talked about this a number of times in the past, if we try to capture every single way in which the network policy might apply that says that the network is not completely open. So certain networks block access to certain sites, for instance, and this is something that happens on a country or enterprise or whatever level basis. Do we require that the captive portal signal that? It's a rat hole that gets really kind of nasty. Yeah.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think in my personal opinion, we might want to remove the word nuisance and replace it with a more apt description of some kind. None comes to mind just yet. Sorry, say again, Michael?
I think you're right, the word nuisance.
Yeah. You can just describe it more correctly in some way.
Authenticating.
We're down to 15 minutes.
14 minutes.
Let's get those last issues done and we'll then talk about next steps. So this is yours, Tommy. I think this is just editorial. So let's move on to the next one. So again, this might be editorial. There is the possibility that someone might decide to move the location of the API or one of the other resources. And yeah, Lorenzo says good luck to them.
Well, we can move the API or the other URLs in the API.
The API or any of the URLs that are referenced from the API. And I think maybe we just not worry about this one. Does anyone want to say something about this particular problem? I know this came up in discussions last year sometime.
Maybe just give a statement of saying that it may happen, and if it happens, then essentially it will just have to go, the device will have to reconnect, right? Essentially, that's the only way it's going to discover.
So by saying nothing here, we make the problem something that the captive portal vendor and the network need to address. They need to make sure that if they want to put a new one in, then retain the old one as a working endpoint. I think that's probably a better way to deal with this particular problem.
So, Tommy, within the URLs given out by the API JSON, those can change because there is an expiry time that's listed on the JSON. So like the clients can refetch. So there's a limited amount of time that is defined by the portal that it needs to maintain old endpoints and new endpoints. So that it can have a fairly graceful transition there. I think so we can mention that to say that that's a way to change the URIs of the actual resources. Changing the portal API itself is, I think, more invasive than we can just say, if you really need to change where things are pointing to, don't change the API. That will be a little bit more destructive.
Lorenzo Calibi, is there any recommendation that the portal URI be the same for everyone, right? Is that explicit? It says should be.
The user portal, no, but you mean the API URL?
The API URL. So, well, we might want to say that.
I think we probably should because of the RA case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, somebody who changes this,
That's what that is.
They're going to have a lot of interoperability problems. So, might want to say that it's not recommended.
You could just say it should be stable for the lifetime of clients. association with the network?
Probably. I don't know if the seat should even be a should. I think leaving it unspecified is fine, to be honest.
Okay, that's editorial as well.
So in terms of next steps here, we are looking, hopefully with Suresh's help, to address these issues in an update within the next little while. And then we have 3 documents. We have no issues on those 3 documents. We seem to have agreement on the way forward on all of the issues that we do have. Expect a working group last call when these documents are updated. Does anyone have any objections to going to that step once we're done here? I would like to get some more eyes on the 7710 document because that one's a little fresher. So maybe a show of hands from folks in the room who are willing to read and review that, and you will get in the minutes. I see a few. Oh, thanks. Yeah, we have a few. Okay. So Darshak, can you capture names? I saw Ted back there as well. I can't see pages, so. Right. And anything else?
Not unless anybody else is. That's it. We should,
I thank you all for your contributions, and we'll let the STIR group take the time.
Blue sheets? Anybody not sign blue sheets? There should be a second one.
I'll take the action item of writing up the request to the NOC, and maybe I'll put it on GitHub and put it on the list, ask for comments, and we'll just kind of revise that doc, including all the things operationally we expect. So, thank you. I'll take that.
This is, yeah, Capport, right? And there's some scribble sheets. There's one. Yeah, currently. Did you amend the document or something like that?